We begin this hour at the White House, where President Trump has two major meetings today as the partial government shutdown enters day 12. He'll be huddling with his cabinet around noon, then with congressional leaders at 3 p.m. to discuss border security.
Well, that meeting will take place inside the Situation Room. The president is still pushing Congress to approve billions of dollars for a border wall as part of any deal to reopen the government. Chip Reid has more.
President Trump has invited 8 congressional leaders to come here to the White House today, including Democrats. Republicans say they will be here, but Democrats are still a bit skeptical as to whether this is a serious effort at negotiation.
So we have to have a wall as part of border security, and we're working on it.
President Trump is not backing down from his demand for wall funding, but said he's willing to talk to Democrats anytime.
I spent Christmas in the White House. I spent New Year's Eve now in the White House. And, I'm here. I'm ready to go. It's very important.
In a tweet directed at soon-to-be House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the president suggested he's ready to make a deal. Today's meeting would be the president's first sit-down with Democratic leaders since December 11th, when he said he would take responsibility for a shutdown.
I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Pelosi says even without a deal, House Democrats will take action Thursday to end the shutdown when they take control of the House. But without an agreement between both parties and the White House, the shutdown's impact grows. Smithsonian museums will be closed today, along with the National Zoo. And for federal employees not allowed to work or working without pay, anxiety is high.
Federal employees shouldn't be treated this way.
Ryan Ball, a Homeland Security employee, is furloughed.
They shouldn't be the bargaining chip in this important debate. I mean, a lot of our work is going undone right now.
Ball is also a representative for the American Federation of Government Employees, the largest union of federal employees, and they are now suing the Trump administration, arguing that making workers work without pay is a violation of federal law. Anne-Marie and Vlad?
All right, Chip, thanks.
Ed O'Keefe is outside of the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington. Ed, so tell us what's happening where you are at the zoo, also the Smithsonian museums and some of the parks across the country. They're shut down as well.
Sure. Not much here. The only folks being allowed in are the workers that care and feed the animals, but visitors will have to stay away until this shutdown is over. There's roughly 2,700 creatures inside this National Zoo, and they'll be taken care of, but they won't have anyone stopping by to take photos of them. Across the country, some national parks are open, but operating with limited staffing. For example, if you were to go to the Lincoln Memorial this morning in Washington, you wouldn't be able to get into the restrooms. If you go to Joshua Tree National Park in California, you can come in and see the sights, but there aren't park rangers there to help give you some sense of what you're seeing, and a lot of the facilities are also closed. So some local businesses that work either in or just outside those parks are trying to step in by helping to clean up the garbage, clean the bathrooms, keep them stocked so that visitors can keep coming. There are, I believe it's 17 Smithsonian museums here in Washington that are all essentially now shuttered, which means if you were a tourist coming here to see the American History Museum, the Air and Space Museum, some of the artwork, you won't be able to. So that obviously has a big economic effect here in the nation's capital and in other cities across the country where there are national parks and landmarks.
Yeah, indeed. Sometimes people book these things way in advance. They take time off. They spend money to travel to Washington. It's a big deal.
And for those paychecks that people are going to be missing, there's rent, there's groceries, there's bills to pay. So, Ed, I want to ask you about this meeting that is scheduled to happen today at the White House between President Trump and Democratic leaders, and some Republicans will be there as well. Do we expect that we will see anything televised similar to what we saw a few weeks ago with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer there in the Oval, or is this going to be closed door, no cameras, behind the doors, behind the scenes?
We don't know yet, Vlad. All we know is that it's at 3 p.m. Eastern, and it's scheduled to begin at least in the White House Situation Room, and that's partly because the White House says this is designed to be a briefing from top Homeland Security advisors about the situation on the border. Now, you ask Democratic lawmakers at least, and they would tell you, look, we're familiar with what's going on down there. We've had these briefings ourselves, and the president has tried to hold briefings like this for lawmakers in the past. Democrats a little skittish about this. While they will be there, they're concerned that this could, as you alluded to, Vlad, turn into yet another photo op where the cameras are brought in and they just yell at each other. We'll see whether or not that happens today. We should point out it's not just Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi coming, it's the Big Eight. It's the top 8 leaders in both chambers of both parties who will be there. Given that it's a larger group meeting, probably makes for less of an opportunity to get a good shot of it, although that would be an even louder shouting match than last time. And everyone's hoping that that isn't what it is, that there is some constructive dialogue here between the two sides as they try to come up with some kind of an agreement. But remember, Democrats have already signaled they'd like to reopen most of the shuttered parts of the government by reopening essentially every agency except Homeland Security through the end of the fiscal year in September. Then they would pass something that would keep Homeland Security open through early November, allowing them to continue negotiating with the White House over money for immigration priorities. But the president has said he's not interested in that, which would suggest we're still at a stalemate.
Right, because if the president's not interested, then I presume the Senate isn't interested either. I mean, it's a nice enough plan, but if you can't get the Senate to sign off on it, it's going nowhere.
Right, and so Democrats have said, look, before Christmas, before our recess, you passed the same exact plan we're going to pass in the House unanimously, therefore with Republican support. So why wouldn't you pass it again this week if we pass it out of the House? No one in the Senate has said yet what they will do, but Republicans traditionally have said, if the president signals there's legislation he doesn't like, then we don't pass it. So Democrats have turned around and said, if you do that, you are, quote unquote, complicit in this shutdown, and they're already preparing to target Republicans who are facing re-election in 2020 for voting against the plan to reopen at least most of the federal government.
You know, Ed, finally, the president tweeted that Mexico is paying for the wall. You know, as well as everybody, that this was a significant campaign promise that he made. The president says that it will be paid through the new USMCA trade deal. What's he talking about?
He's talking about the idea that the new NAFTA essentially would pay for this through various tariffs or by tweaking the trade surplus between the two countries. You talk to people who track this stuff closely and they say, look, maybe indirectly one day you could make the point that the roughly $5 billion he's asking for, at least in this first go-round, would come through Mexican trade or the lack of it. But otherwise, you will not see the Mexican government cut a check to the United States to build this wall. They've made that very clear. Obviously, the president is interested in keeping this campaign pledge and struggling there to come up with a justification for how exactly the Mexicans would pay for it. But they say it the same way we say it in English. No, they're not paying for it.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate it as always.